What is up, everybody? Welcome to the All-NBA show, part of the All-City Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Mares, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Tim Legler. Legs, we had a day off for the first time in a while. What'd you do with it?
I had a day off. Here's what I do. I could have just, I'm between games in D.C., so I could have just stayed in D.C. on my day off, my first day off in a long time, and just kind of kicked up. Adam ordered room service, watched a movie, taking a walk around D.C. Instead, I drove 3.5 hours each direction so I could see my wife and my son for the night. So, hey, if Father's Day is coming up, I'm actually leveraging that into something nicer. So I'm trying to get a nicer gift. That's really kind of what that amounted to, is some personal selfish reasons in there, but that's right. Yeah. That's what I did, and I got back. It was worth it, though. It was definitely worth it. And I got back, drove back down to D.C., and here I am getting ready to do this and then head into the studio with SCP tonight and break down Game 5.
There you go. You're like the dad version of the players that go off right before All-Star voting ends, like the week of, and they just try to get their stats up a little bit just to make their case.
That is a great point. That's exactly what I did. I got a couple things in mind on my wish list, so we'll see if it paid off.
There you go. On today's show, we're going to talk about Game 4. We didn't do a show yesterday, so we're going to talk about Game 4 between the Wolves and the Mavs, but really we're going to try to talk about it through the lens of Game 5, which is happening tonight in Minnesota. So how does Minnesota get back in the series, and what lessons have we learned? What things are going on there? And in the back half of the show, we're going to talk about whose stock is up from this playoffs. Who did themselves some favors this playoffs? Who's maybe the big winners? Players, could be coaches, could be GMs. We're going to talk about all of that. Should be a great show. But first, All NBA is sponsored by DraftKings. Stay tuned because you'll hear more about DraftKings and all it has to offer throughout the show. DraftKings, the crown is yours. So on Tuesday night, the Timberwolves strike back. No Derek Lively. The Timberwolves pull out a clutch time win, 105-100. This series has always come down to the wire. Every single one of these games has been neck and neck. But this time, it was the Timberwolves pulling out the clutch win and getting the clutch stops and making the big-time plays down the stretch. So what stood out to you as we kind of look back on this one? What stood out to you about that game, and why did Minnesota get the win?
I mean, to me, this is a Karl Anthony Towns moment. That's what all the conversation was around. And I give the guy a pat on the back, man, a lot of love, because, look, I know what it's like to be in a shooting slump, particularly from deep, which, he was 3 for 22 in the series from three, 4 for 32 if you go back to the last two games of the previous round. That's a serious drought. I mean, those are some numbers that you'd normally see out of a 3-and-D type specialist, right? Who only takes 3 or 4 a game and hits a cold stretch because they're not a pure shooter anyway. That's not supposed to come out of a guy like Karl Anthony Towns that's this good of a shooter, this good of an offensive player. And look, not only, Adam, was he mired in this slump that was so scrutinized, right? I can't imagine how much talk was going on in Minnesota. Nationally, that's what everybody was talking about as well. Not only was he in that, he starts out the game and he immediately gets in foul trouble, which is a whole nother thing that like mentally hurts your aggressiveness. It limits your ability to play freely because you're more reluctant to put the ball in the ground and go to the hole. One, and then just defensively, you can't, if you're not an aggressive mindset defensively, it's actually hard to be an aggressive mindset offensively too. So he gets himself in foul trouble. He did get a couple of inside buckets to go early in the game in the first quarter, which I thought could take the lid off for him. But then the foul trouble kicks in and he gets his third in the second quarter. He has to go to the bench for a stretch. I'm thinking like, man, this is going to be tough. This is going to be another game. Number one, it looked like at that point, maybe Dallas just sweeps this thing. Two, even if they do win, it might not be because Karl Anthony Towns has much of an impact. And then just like that, he flips a switch, hits 3 threes in a very short period of time. I thought the biggest possessions of the game really for Minnesota to get the separation they needed to hold Dallas off. So I just want to give the guy credit, man, because it's like you press. I don't care who you are. I was a role player. Karl Anthony Towns has been an all-star. He's a different caliber player. It doesn't matter. I had Scottie Pippen one time tell me when he worked with us a little bit and did some studio work for ESPN, he told me that every year he would go through periods of time where your confidence struggles. Doesn't matter who you are. If you're not having success over a stretch of games with your shooting, you definitely press. You want to end it. And the next shot, you want to end the slump. And then you start thinking like that, it snowballs against you. And I think Karl-Anthony Towns had some wiring issues going on up here between the ears. I think it was interrupting his muscle memory, and he was thinking too much and pressing. And he fought through it to have a huge impact in the game. And without his shooting in the fourth quarter, they don't win that game and their season's over. So that for me is, I guess, where I would start, Adam. Karl-Anthony Towns snapped out of whatever he was in, had a huge impact offensively in the fourth quarter, helps them get a road win, and now they get to extend the series and head home.
Well, I like that you mentioned, it was 3 3-pointers in that fourth quarter. And they were all big moments. And the last one in particular was just huge because you missed that one. It felt like, I don't remember the exact time that was left on the clock, but it felt like the one where I turned to say, oh, they're going to win this game. All right, Wolves win, they're moving on. Whereas if you miss that one, anything's possible.
Well, so I'll tell you, just to give it context, I'm looking at it right now. It was 95-92, and he hit a three with 2:54 left to go up 6.
Yep. So that's the huge one there, because that's a huge swing there. That you missed that. Dallas is probably scoring the other direction, and it was a tough one. And to be honest, when he shot it, I thought that's off, like that's not going in. And of course, he hits it. So you give credit to him, because when we talk about clutch time, last 5 minutes, it's not always true clutch plays. That was a clutch play, and I'm glad for him. I'm honestly happy for him that he hit that one. And then Anthony Edwards, he had an interesting comment. So 29, 10, and 9 for him, and I thought he was great in this one. Did not shoot the ball well, 11 of 25, but he had an interesting comment after the game where he said, I've never been swept in my life, like at anything. Nobody's ever swept me. And that was my motivation. Like, I don't want to have that on my record in any, ever in my life, this record there. And I was thinking, that is the motivation when you're down 0-3. Don't get swept. But then if you win game 3, it makes me wonder what the carryover motivation, or win game 4, what's the carryover motivation, after that. And the way he was talking, it was almost like, I know you take it game by game when you're a pro athlete and you're in that spot, but it almost made me wonder, is that more motivation than when you go back 3-1, right? The fear of being swept versus the mountain you have to climb now, winning 3 more in a row. I just thought it was an interesting comment. And I'm kind of curious what you think an athlete's mind frame is, not wanting to get swept. And then if there's a letdown, an emotional letdown after that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's kind of funny. The comment cracked me up because, being realistic about this and honest about this, the only opportunity you're going to have to get swept is going to be the NBA playoffs, because what else would you get swept? You don't get swept in the NCAA tournament. You just lose a game and you're going home, right? Or AAU, that term doesn't apply. High school basketball, like there's no such thing, unless he's talking about, if he's playing table tennis, best of 7 at home with somebody, whatever. But he's only had.
I'll bet you he means that. By the way, he's a competitive guy. I bet he means that.
That's possible. Yeah, listen. I like all those competitive games at home too. I'm constantly setting up tournaments for my friends and all kinds of stuff. I love that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure what exactly be referring to other than the NBA playoffs. And look, each of the last 2 years, they played 1 round and they lost in 6 and then they lost in 5. So it didn't apply then. He played 2 other rounds this year. Prior to this, they won both of those. So yeah, this is really the first real opportunity we're talking about here. He's right though. Like the finality of that and what that says in getting swept, particularly in a situation like this, you were the higher seeded team. It's not like somehow, you upset a couple of people and then you end up in the conference finals and no one saw that coming. Yeah, certainly beating Denver, I guess some people would consider that maybe, but that's a 2-3 matchup. They're favored in the other 2 rounds they played. Not favored, but the home court advantage. They're the higher seeded team. So it says if you get swept in this situation, particularly, like, wow, you're maybe not as good as we thought you were as a team, like the sweep factor, right? I think that just getting on the board is important. But here's where I think it's also, Adam, and you and I haven't had a chance to discuss this. I talked about it on some other formats because you and I didn't have a show since the game ended. There's all 3 O's are not created the same.
Yeah.
So I look at the 2 series and I look at the one where, okay, if you're the lower seeded team like Indiana was against Boston, and you're down 3-0. Well, that means obviously you lost the first 2 games on the road, which no one's shocked by that. It's the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. And then you lost game 3 at home. So you're thinking to yourself, just win a game, just win 1 game. The difference, though, is psychologically, you win that game, what happens to you? You go right back on the road to play Boston in their building and probably get closed out. If you're the higher seeded team,
Right.
okay, it stinks. You lost 2 games at home to start the series. But when you lose game 3, you're looking at game 4 and saying, let's just win 1 game, just like Indiana was saying. But the difference here is if you can win 1 game, you go home. You're going home now. So you got a chance now to build some momentum. And knowing that, by the way, Dallas only has 1 more home game in this series. Yep. So if you're Minnesota, like the feeling psychologically of not just winning a game, but like of actually winning the series, it's a lot more reason to believe if you're in the circumstances Minnesota was in. 2 of the next 3 are at home if we can get this game. Like we have a legitimate shot here because the amount of pressure Dallas would feel if it's a 3-2 situation and they've got 1 home game to close the deal, there is so much pressure on that team in a game 6 in their own building. And that's what I think the difference in like buoyancy and like what you feel and the spirit you have is far greater if Minnesota could win a game than if Indiana could. Because if Indiana wins a game, they're still going to Boston in the next game, and then they still would have to go there for a game 7, even if they got that far. So it looks insurmountable if you're the Pacers. If you're the Timberwolves, I don't think you viewed it that way. You viewed it like these are all close games. Let's just win one of these games. And then we got a lot going for us in the remaining part of the series as far as home court. If we can just get a win, and they did. And I think that's where psychologically they're going to be in a really strong place going into game 5.
So if you were to, like, no team's ever come back from 0-3. I think at some point somebody is going to. At some point. It's sports, right? It's going to happen eventually. Yep. And if you were to say, okay, what is the script for a team coming down 0-3? Well, here's how I would start. Every game is close. You get through those first 3 games. They're all close. They could have gone either way. When a team blows you out, it's like, man, sometimes if we go the rope, this team's a lot better than us, whatever. Not the case here. These 2 teams it's come down to the final 2 minutes in every single game, including the one they won. Then you would say, okay, there's going to be an injury to a key piece. In this case, it was Derek Lively. We have that injury. He's a game time decision tonight. He's questionable tonight. I'll bet he plays, but is he fully healthy? We'll talk about that here in a second. So you have an injury to a key piece. Then you look at it and say, okay, the 2 of the final 3 games are at home. And for the exact reason you said, game 4, it's a survival game. Just don't get swept. But now you set the table for we only have to go to 1 road game and we could still momentum, and that game 7 is at home. So I look at this and I say, if I were to pick right now, I would say Mavericks win this in 6. I think that we'll get to it in a second, what I think happens in game 5. But I think Mavs win this in 6. But if you want to talk yourself into it as a Wolves fan, somebody has to do it eventually. Yeah. And the table is at least set as favorably as it can be for you to kind of make a statement. I look at that and I go, if I'm a Timberwolves fan, and especially if I'm a Timberwolves player, it's enough. It's enough for me to fool myself into believing.
Completely agree with everything you just said. So there's numbers say 155-0 when you get up 3-0. 155-0, okay? Only 4 teams, and I should have looked this up before we came on because now I'm just thinking about it. Only 4 teams are forced to game 7.
Wow.
One of those was last year, right? Miami did that. Miami-Boston.
Oh, right.
Boston did it to Miami, right?
They're
down 3-0.
They almost did the
forced
thing.
Game 7. They end up losing that game. So other than last year, it's only happened 3 other times in NBA history where a team even got to a game 7.
Right.
And I'm curious to know, like, I would like to know, like, how many of those ended up losing that game 7 on the road.
Right.
I would like to know that. In a situation where, you're down 3-0 and you fight back and then you win, you win that game 6 at home to get to 3-3, but then you have to go on the road to get closed out in game 7. My point being, this is not that case. If you can get it to a game 7, it's in your place. So coming back from 3-0 and then you get the last game at home, if that were the case. Look, and having said all of that, I agree with you. I'm not going to be surprised if Dallas wins tonight. I'm not going to be surprised if they win in game 6.
Right.
I would be shocked if it goes beyond that.
Right.
I don't think they're going to beat Dallas 3 times in a row with a Luka-led team. I just don't believe he's going to let that happen. But there will be an immense amount of pressure on them if this gets to a game 6, knowing this is your last shot at home. Now, look, I picked Dallas in 7, which is unusual because normally if you pick a road team to win a series, you usually say 6, right? Because you think, well, they're not going to win it on the road in game 7. Like historically, that's just really hard to do. This is a different player. Luka Doncic is a different player, and he's already done it once. He did it to Phoenix. So I just believe in his ability to be calm, cool, collected, and play at an even slower pace if that's what it took to let the game happen for him in the pressure of a game 7. And Kyrie as well, I really believe in him. While a lot of other guys might struggle with the shot-making pressure of a game like that. So I still think Dallas could win a game 7, but I think they either win it tonight or they win it in a game 6. I don't think it gets beyond that.
You saying Dallas in 7 in this series was your biggest heat check. Like, you've had a lot of right predictions, right? You've been riding this Mavs since the trade deadline. You've been on it, but you predicting the road win for Luka is your ultimate. That's Legler pulling up from the logo on that one. 20 seconds on the clock, and you say, you know what? It's going to happen in game 7 nonetheless. Let's get to the Derek Lively piece of this because it's such a big one. Obviously, he misses the last game. It's still razor-thin margins, but they don't close. Tonight, questionable. Here's what's weird about this injury. Everybody's played through a rolled ankle. Everybody's played through a tight hamstring. Everybody's played through a knee injury. Neck is a one that you don't get. In your life, you might have 1, maybe 2 times your neck is sore, and it's a scary one. And I look at that and I go, either he doesn't play tonight, or more likely he does play, but that's not something you can game plan for. How am I going to respond to that? How am I going to be able to play through that and do the physicality? So I look at that one and I say, game 5 is going to be very similar to me in game 4 and how I look at it, in that the margins are razor thin, and he is one of the bigger margins outside of the star players. He's one of the bigger margins in the series. So if I just look at it on paper, I say that's a big loss. And that's why I think Minnesota actually pulls out a win tonight if I had to pick one side of it. Do you agree that it's a huge loss? And do you agree specifically about the part about the neck injury, that it's a weird injury to try to project how a guy will play through that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's hard to project because, who knows if he tries to play and it's still a certain amount of stiffness in there, soreness. Is he tentative in how he's going about it? So that means he's less effective. I will say this, going from the designation of out to questionable is a huge leap. I think he plays. I think Luka's designated as questionable. So I think to have Lively designated as questionable is a big deal. I think that tells me he's going to play. And I think that tells me that, he's not feeling anything that's going to cause concern on the part of their medical staff, that like he's not 100%. And this is a very delicate part of your body. And we don't want to mess with this because it's connected to your head. And there's just a lot going on up there above the shoulders that we don't want to mess with. I don't think you would have gotten to questionable if he wasn't tracking that way. You could even have listed him yesterday still as doubtful. Okay. And upgraded that today, or you could have upgraded that today to game time decision if he really made a lot of improvement in 24 hours. The fact that they got there yesterday on an off day, they got him to questionable. I think that's a really good sign that Derek Lively plays and he's very close to feeling 100%.
Wow. I even on the bench when they were flashing to him, and they flashed him a lot, by the way. What's that?
I know what you're going to say. Yeah,
a lot of this.
At one point, he kind of closed his eyes and rolled his neck like this, like I might do if I wake up with a bad hotel pillow. Like I may wake up and kind of roll. Right? That's what he looked like. I knew you were going to say that. I was thinking the same thing because at first he looked fine. The camera was on him for 30 seconds, and he was kind of like bobbing his head. He was like talking to guys, and all of a sudden, that last 5 seconds, he just kind of went like this, and I'm like, oh man, what's he feeling? But again, I just think I know how these designations work, and anything other than a go, anything below that is typically overstated. It's either go or out. Those are definitive. Those aren't overstated, obviously.
Yeah, that's true.
Everything else I think is over. Like, how many times have you seen game time decision? What percentage of game time decisions do those guys play? 95% of the time. Those guys play. What?
You know what? You're right. And I think especially with star players. But here's one thing. What did we say about Giannis? He was listed as questionable the whole playoffs. And it comes out, it's like I was a month away, 2 months away from being back.
No,
That could be a little –
but
a
I
little
think that was a gamesmanship thing with Giannis, with Doc. I think that's all that was.
It could be tonight.
But I don't know that Lively. I don't know that there's a gamesmanship to be had there. Giannis is a one-off. Like Dallas basically has another Lively in Gafford. I mean, they have two Livelies. That's basically what they have. So I don't know that there's an advantage there mentally for the other team to prepare for Derek Lively. You're already preparing for Gafford. So it's the exact same preparation for Lively. That's what I mean. If Giannis plays or doesn't play, it's a completely different game plan defensively. So I think that's what Doc wanted to keep alive. So they waste any time talking about Giannis in their film room or walkthroughs is they think somehow that could have helped them. Right. Because for Giannis to come out after and say he wasn't even close, then obviously Doc knew that too. So why are you saying this? He's close. He's close. He's close. I mean, he didn't even say – he went beyond saying questionable. They asked him, and he said he's very close. Very close. Like, close to what?
He's warming
close
up in the tunnel right now. He's stretching. He's getting loose. We don't know. We'll see. One other quick little note, and I just found this kind of funny. Chris Finch had a Willis Reed moment in the last game. He's been sitting in that second row all playoffs, just sitting there. There's some tough foul calls that go against Minnesota, and he gets up, and he kind of waddles angrily over to the official, gets a technical foul and everything, and after the game, some of the players said, or I think Mike Conley was like, yeah, man, like after that, it picked us up. It lit a fire in us a little bit. It's a small thing, but I actually do think those things are somewhat meaningful. Like, you know what? We're on our last legs here. We're fighting for our lives. And here comes our coach in pain to come have our back. It's just a small thing, but I wanted to shout it out.
No doubt about it, man. It's I noticed it too. It's kind of like, whoa, Chris Finch is standing up, man. Like, it's a massive, major injury. He had major surgery. So, yeah, I agree, man. Like it was listen, battle and fight. And I knew they would. I have a lot of respect for their fight. They play really hard. These are two elite defensive teams. And so, it's going to be difficult, like to get to your normal offensive efficiency. For Minnesota, they just had to have a contribution out of Karl-Anthony Towns. He's too important to them offensively. You're not going to get these 20-point nights, out of Jaden McDaniels. Like that's just not something you can count on. You can't count on Mike Conley to dial it up to that extent, or anybody else on their roster. I mean, Naz Reid, okay, yeah, I guess he's capable of doing something like that, but you need Karl-Anthony Towns because even on a bad night, man, you can usually pencil in 16, 18. And other nights you can get up into the mid-high 20s. So for him to look normal and think about it, he really only did it in a half of basketball. It wasn't even the whole game. It was the second half with their season hanging in the balance, and he played the way he did. So I just want to give him a lot of credit, man, because I know what he was feeling and what he was thinking about and what he was hearing. And as much as you want to try to turn off social media and turn off coverage and all that and live in your own cocoon, that sometimes can be even worse, man, because you're just in your own thoughts all day. So it's not easy in the middle of a series to bounce back like that. Now let's see. Here's one thing I will say though, Adam. I said this yesterday to some people. They were surprised to hear this, but I'm telling you how I felt. And most shooters, I think, feel the same way. If I was in a bad stretch as a player, there's nothing better than getting on the road. Like if I was struggling in Washington for a stretch, give me that 5-game road trip, because at home, every miss is magnified. They feel like that's what you're on the court to do. That's what you're supposed to do. You're not making shots. They react to every miss. You miss 2 again in the next game. Here they come again. You can feel it. And certain arenas are worse than that, than others. But I'm telling you, you got on the road. It's us against the world. It's just this group of people. No one really is rooting for us, supporting us at all, except this group of people. These players, I would have said, 15 players and then, it's 5 coaches, because that's what it was when I played. Now it's 15 players and 37 coaches. It's just us, right? And when we're the ones that care, and you are now it's a foxhole mentality, and you're not worried about every reaction on a miss the way you get at home, and it makes you relax. And I think that helped him. But so now he carries that pressure at home because they haven't seen him do it at home. He has struggled in the 2 games there. He's got to now carry that shooting performance and see if the momentum gets him through a game 5 when there's going to be heightened pressure, heightened reaction to everything he does. So it's a different element of just overall awareness on the part of Karl-Anthony Towns of what's going on around him.
So what are you looking for tonight in this game 5? What do you kind of expect? And I'll let you start on the Minnesota side. What are you looking for that will be important for them to pull out the win?
Well, I think, look, they did. First, again, you've got to get your top guys have good offensive games. So Edwards, Towns, whatever the number you think is, it's probably somewhere around 50. Start at 50 as a baseline and go up from there. That's what they have to have, and then just get whatever you can out of the rest of that group, and add it up into somewhere in the low hundreds, 105, something like that. But those two guys have got to account for about half of that. And if they don't, I think they're in trouble. Defensively, they had some adjustments in the last game. They decided to let Jaden McDaniels chase Kyrie around a little bit more. And I said before, if you remember, before the first game, I said the physical profile, Anthony Edwards fits that player more than anybody else to guard Luka because he's stronger. He's a little bit thicker. He doesn't give ground as much when Luka hits you with all those shoulders and gets you on his hip. Anthony Edwards is stronger. He's a better athlete. And Jaden McDaniels is long. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker's got some long arms. Those guys are too light. And Luka, he just bounces them around and he does what he wants to do. So they switched it up last game. And my fear was Anthony Edwards getting in foul trouble. Now, he had 5 fouls in the game. So, he did take it to the precipice, but at no point were you concerned about his ability to continue to play through foul trouble. So that was interesting. Let's see if that continues. I thought they selectively got the ball to Luka's hands. They didn't do it the whole time. You need to do that sometimes, and I thought they did it. I actually saw 4 different coverages of Luka Doncic in the fourth quarter on ball screen. 4 different coverages.
Right.
That's what it takes against Luka. You can't give him a steady diet of anything, of any one player, of any one coverage. He's too good, and he's going to solve that. And I thought they mixed it up pretty well on him, so I'm looking for some more of that. And look, bottom line is they're going to have to make shots. They're going to have to make shots from their top guys, and I think it's going to be another tight game. 6 minutes to go, probably hanging in the balance. And who's going to make the pressure shots? The first 3 games, that was more Dallas. Game 4, Minnesota did that.
Yeah. All right. What about the other side? Dallas, even with a somewhat injured Livelly, what can they do to close this out on the road?
I think you're going to see this be a Luka kind of early established control and presence and have a more efficient game. Neither one of those guys shot well. They're 2 stars. I guess they were due for that. I think Minnesota's defense contributed to that, but they also missed shots they had been making. I think Luka and Kyrie have had conversations, and they understand that you can't just think about having a game in hand at home coming up. Cannot even let that thought enter your mind. You have to act almost like this is game 7 and you're on the road. That would be the mentality I would have if I were Dallas. And when that happens, that tends to have everything gravitate toward Luka controlling things early, getting to the line, getting to mid-range, not taking as many step-back threes early in the game. One thing I love about Luka, there's no pretense with him. He comes out every night and tries to get himself cooking first. That's just the way he operates. There's a lot of elite scorers in this league, Adam, that kind of feel their way, the first 6 minutes.
Jokic is the worst offender of this. And I say worst because for him, it's a crutch. He often comes out and does it in a way where you're like, what are you doing? Put the pressure on the defense. And Luka, you don't have to tell him that. He always comes in.
And he's not the only one that does that. I can list other scorers that do the same thing. And it's like Luka's the exact opposite. He's like, no, absolutely. Listen, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm dressed for the gala tonight. I'm going to get myself ready. And then I'm going to invite everybody else. But first, let me see and dip my toe in the water and see what I got going on early. And I love that mentality because he understands at the end of the day, his rhythm is more important than anybody else on the court. His rhythm. So he'll do that again, but I think he'll do it in a way that is more about getting to his spots that he likes, more so than taking some tough, deep threes. And you missed a few of those early, and I think it gives Minnesota some energy when you see that early in the game. I think Luka's going to try to get to the rim, to the line, to the mid-range early in the game, establish control, and let everybody know he's here tonight at a really high level to be much more efficient, and everybody kind of falls in line off of that.
All righty. Let's real quick, let's do a segment here sponsored by DraftKings Sportsbook. And again, use code ALLNBA. Let's just look at the lines here. And Emma, I'm looking for the lines. I don't know where. Oh, here it is. Timberwolves tonight, 4.5-point favorites, and they're minus 112 to win the game. So Vegas at least looks at this one and says Minnesota should win tonight. I happen to agree with it. Again, all of these games have been razor thin. I still worry about the Livelly part of this. I think this game is going to mirror game 4 in that it's very close, but this time the Timberwolves pull it out. I'm going to pick Mavs in 6, but I at least agree with Vegas. Do you agree with the Vegas line here, -4.5?
Yeah, I do. I agree with that. I think that's what it should be. I think, look, Minnesota was a 3 seed for a reason, man. And they got an elite level defense. So they're going home. They've got some momentum. They feel a lot better about themselves. I think people are going to look at some of the issues Dallas had offensively in the last game, and now you're carrying that into their home building where their energy will have their defense playing at a heightened frenzy. Yes, it makes sense to me that Minnesota would be favored, and that's probably about the right number. It's going to be a tight game. I'd be very surprised if it's not. I just think both of these teams, it's very difficult to go and run away with it in this series. I think the defenses are so evenly matched, and the star power offensively, I just think that it's going to be a tight game again. Not going to be surprised one bit if Minnesota wins this game, and I'm not going to be surprised if Dallas does either. Just, if you asked me and forced me to say who I think will win the game, if I had to pick, I would probably say Minnesota forces a game 6. That's probably where I would lean. But come on, man, this is Luka Doncic. I'm not going to be surprised he gets a road win here and closes this thing out either. So I do know this. I'd be very surprised if we're coming out of that last mandatory timeout in the fourth quarter and this isn't a 1-possession game or within 5. Yeah. I think that's where we're going to be.
I kind of agree with you, although I'm going to say a couple more possessions, because if you tell me it's a 1-point possession in this game with 2 minutes to go, I think I would flip and take Mavs in that scenario. I'm going to say it's like a 2 or 3 possession game and it ends a 1-possession game. That's going to be my bold prediction. All right, let's take a break. On the other side, just to wrap up today's show, I wanted to talk about the biggest winners of the playoffs so far. And there's a couple names that the playoffs, sometimes they go so slowly, you forget what the narrative was 2 months ago when the playoffs began. We're going to talk about some of the guys who have maybe redeemed themselves or made a name for themselves throughout this playoffs. We'll get to that on the other side. But first, let me tell you guys about Shady Rays. Get ready for the season ahead with quality shades built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered with premium polarized shades that won't break the bank. Shady Rays is an independent sunglass company offering a world-class product rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Their shades have durable frames and crystal clear optics, making them the perfect choice for all outdoor activities. They have hundreds of options to choose from, so you're bound to find the perfect pair to match your style. I've got my aviators right here. I'm telling you, because they've been sponsoring the show, I have 4 pairs. I've got one in my backpack, one in each of the cars that I drive, my car and my wife's car, and I have one at home. That way I always have a pair of glasses on me. And I recommend you do the same because they got all these different styles that you can go to. I've got all of these. They've got all kinds of different colors and everything else that's going to match your wardrobe. And exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the season. Head to shadyrays.com and use code AC35 for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades that are rated 5 stars by 300,000 people. Also want to tell you about DraftKings Sportsbook, where this close to getting to the finals could happen tonight. And right now, the action is heating up on the court. It's even hotter on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500. Just deposit at least $5, and you'll get back a bonus bet equal to your first bet if it doesn't hit. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code ALLNBA. That's code ALLNBA for new customers to get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500 if your first bet doesn't hit. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or in West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. One no-sweat bet per new customer. Issued as one bonus bet based on amount of initial losing bet. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.co/bball for eligibility, wagering, and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources.
Back here, segment 2 of the All-NBA podcast. We got the game tonight. We could have our final set, which means the playoffs. We're just about 3 rounds through and headed to the finals. But let's look back now and talk about who has made a name for themselves so far. Who are the big winners? I have a list here. Like, do you want me to start the list or do you want to start it?
Yeah, you can start the list. We'll talk about some of your guys, some of the guys that you have written down, and I'll think of a few more that we can add to it.
I'm going to start, and sometimes it's like, is it just from the playoffs? Does it go a little bit before that? The guy I want to start with is actually Nico Harrison. And the reason I bring him up, the general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, youngish GM, new to the business. I know a lot of people were questioning, is this the right move when they brought him in? And then you make a move at the deadline to get Gafford, to get PJ Washington. And it's the type of move that it wasn't a big splash. Big names are the big splash. But you look at that roster and you go, you have 2 stars in Kyrie Irving, who, by the way, also controversial ad, and Luka Doncic, and you surround them with the right talent. These are good players, not great, but very good. But they're very good specifically for what the team needs to do. Derek Jones Jr., another one. Dante Exum. The guys that are being played were assembled by Nico Harrison. And you look at this roster now and how it's performed in the playoffs, and you go, that roster makes a lot of sense. These guys are good, and they have an identity that's well established. I think for me, he was a guy that had a negative sort of reputation coming into the trade deadline. And if you look at it now, you go, wow, those were brilliant moves that almost nobody saw coming. Of course, you were very high on the moves when he made them. But I think Nico Harrison is one of the big winners of the playoffs so far.
I love that. And, I think the other night they showed him on camera. And it was, I don't know, maybe they did earlier in the playoff. I didn't notice it if they did. I felt like it was the first time he was mentioned. And you're right. He does deserve it, because it's really hard to make like fringe moves, rotational moves. It's one thing when you go and you go and you're all in on trying to get some star player. That happens every year at the trading deadline. I mean, and a lot of times you're thinking like, yeah, it doesn't take a genius to figure out like this is a guy that you'd want to go after if you can. But when you start talking about like plugging in the holes and adding depth and pieces around the margins that have this kind of impact, very difficult to do. And that's exactly what Gafford and PJ Washington have done. And even you could go back to the fact that they got Livelly. I mean, you look at the guys that they have that have had such a massive impact on this team, and you're one game away from the NBA Finals in large part to that. Even Kyrie, they took a lot of heat when that happened.
Yep.
And nobody knew if that was going to work out. And certainly last year, it was like the wheels weren't coming off the cart. That thing was skidding with no wheels down the hill, the way that season ended. And you're like, well, what's the next year going to look like? And they've come a long way. And I give Kyrie individually, personally, a lot of credit for that. But you have to recognize a fit by pairing those two guys together in the first place that you think is going to work. And now to go and supplement other parts of the roster, I think that's a great one. I think it's a great name, Nico Harrison.
I also think he's ahead of the curve here, and who knows how much of this was intentional, but with this new collective bargaining agreement, the Nuggets had their exit interview, last week or the week before. And one of the things Josh Kroenke started the interview with was, we assembled this team under a different set of rules. And now our challenge is to adjust to these new rules. And one of the things Denver did was give 3 max contracts. I think that's out. I think the formula going forward under the new collective bargaining agreement is 2 max contract players, a star and a co-star. Yeah. And then you're going to fill it out with guys making between $10 and $18 million a year. And if you look at that, that's exactly what they have. PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, Tim Hardaway Jr. And then you get value adds in Dante Exum, who they took a flyer on. You got Derek Jones, who they took a flyer on. And then Derek Lively, obviously a draft pick. So they rounded out. You can even add Jaden Hardy, who's been playing a lot of minutes, lately in this series. So you can look at that and say they went 2 stars, a middle class of players that give them some depth, and then hit on some young guys who give them even more depth. And that's the formula. Now, whether that was because he saw the collective bargaining agreement or just by happenstance, either way, I think more teams are going to look like the Dallas Mavericks in years to come. I think that's the blueprint you're going to look at. Let's go to another guy on the same team. I'm going to go Jason Kidd, another guy who I think was stock a little bit down before the trade deadline. Is he a great coach? Is he stubborn? Is he the right guy for this job? Does he expire? All of those things. He's been a great playoff adjuster. And that Mavs team they've been prepared the whole playoffs. They're not getting blown out in any games. They're always right there. And he seems to, game by game, have the answers and has his team prepared. He's got great talent to work with, smart players, talented players. But I think that he's viewed differently right now than he was 2 months ago.
Look, there were some coaches I thought were kind of in a similar boat going into the postseason. I knew Darvin Ham was going to be in trouble if they didn't figure out a way that they could advance. Frank Vogel was another guy we were looking at. And I thought Jason Kidd, and I said this about Jason Kidd, they hit a rough patch second half of the year after they had these guys. And I said, man, if they flame out losing the first round with this team that I was looking at and saying with those two guys, and then I thought the pieces fit, and you get bounced in the first round, you lose to the Clippers in the first rounds, particularly if they didn't have Kawhi Leonard and you lose to them. I thought he was in trouble. So what happens? Phoenix gets bounced early. Frank Vogel fired. Lakers get bounced early. Darvin Ham fired. Mavericks go on to the conference finals. Jason Kidd extension. So this is the way it works. So I think it was a precarious situation. So you talk about big winners. I think Jason Kidd was at that fork in the road, man. He was at that moment that this team had to move on in advance. And they did it. And now I like Jason Kidd a lot. I think for me, a big part of coaching and how you judge coaches is defensive preparation. And I feel like defensively, to improve to the extent that they did, once they had the pieces in place athletically that you could do certain things defensively, and then to go ahead now, I got the pieces. Now it's up to us to improve this defense. That's preparation, game plan, scheme, matchups, all of that stuff. And they've been a top flight defense ever since. And I give the coaches a lot of credit. And the top coach is the guy that's going to get most of that credit. And that's Jason Kidd.
I got one more coach before we move on to some players, but Michah Nori, unique situation. Chris Finch gets injured. He's still there coaching. He's still part of everything, but you need to have a surrogate, for lack of a better word, who's kind of coaching on the court. Michah Nori, I think, has done a great job, but also, this, Legs, assistant coaches aren't well known. It's hard for them to get a name out there. Michah Nori, I think, through this process, beating Denver, his former team, and being able to be in the lead there, he's a name now, an assistant coach that when next jobs come up, people are going to be saying Michah Nori. Remember when he helped lead him on that run to the conference finals and who knows, maybe beyond. So I think Michah Nori is a winner.
I would probably temper that one a little bit in my mind about how much exactly. We know who Michah Nori is now. I'm talking about just national content.
Not.
You're certainly aware of who Michah Nori is now. But I think that to really have your stock rise to that level, it almost, you have to think it would have to be your team for a year. This is just a communication thing between Finch and him. And I mean, I was surprised Finch said he was giving as much responsibility as he was early on. I don't know. He's going to call sets. He's going to call timeouts, whatever. Right. They can sell how they want. I'm like, wow, really? That's incredible amount of control when you're sitting right there. But I guess there's no other way around it. When you're behind the bench, it's just really hard to maintain control, right? And to helm that thing. So, listen, I agree. He's now somebody that we are aware of. Certainly has handled this incredibly well. I don't know. I might be dead wrong, but I don't know to what extent his name is going to be a hot name when coaching jobs pop up in the future because of this set of circumstances.
It's more head coaching, quote unquote, head coaching experience than most guys who have never been a head coach. It's at least something. It's not a full, you don't get full credit, but you do get a partial credit for it. And I think that might help him. Let's get to some players. I'm going to start with my guy. You had to know I was going to start here. Isaiah Hartenstein. Man, this guy is about to get paid. He was unbelievable in the playoffs. And I'm going to get hot here, Legs. I'm going to pull up from the logo myself right now. I think Isaiah Hartenstein in this playoffs proved that he could be a top 15 center in the league, 15 to 20. He's not a star. But when you get into that role of okay, well, can they do a lot of things? Are they reliable? Are they capable? He was more than capable throughout this playoff run. He was incredible. And I think he's a guy that's going to make some money.
Well, listen, just in terms of if you just base that on jersey sales based on your household, when you guys are at Thanksgiving dinner with 30 family members all wearing a Hartenstein jersey. I mean, everybody. You got the dogs wearing one. Everybody's got a Hartenstein jersey. Yeah, everybody. It's a great place to start. And you know what is funny is his numbers very similar to the regular season, but because of the stage and the impactful moments with particularly his offensive rebounding and some of those in the Philly series, and it just carried so much more weight when you do it with all eyeballs on you and you're playing these really tough physical series and you're the guy that's beating people to these 50-50 balls. But his numbers didn't dramatically go up. They're very similar to what he did in the regular season. And I already felt this way about him. So, but what he did for me was show me that it's one thing to do it in the regular season.
Yep. That's it.
You know what I mean? Because to do it in the postseason under pressure of that, some guys, they just can't handle that. That's just not, they're not made for that. He proved that he is. And that's a big question mark filled by Isaiah Hartenstein for the New York Knicks and a box checked going forward on him. And we know he's gonna get a big payday this summer, and he earned every dime of it.
Next guy I'm going to go to is Andrew Nembhard. And this is an interesting one because we talked about the defensive issues that he presented in round 2, but offensively, he just looks like he has upside. We talked about this on the last show, but he was incredible in this run. And I think he's another guy who was maybe not on the radar just to the casual NBA fans or even the semi-serious NBA fans. But if you watch this playoffs, his name came up a lot in positive ways throughout the playoffs. He looked phenomenal. And as we talked about last show, you start to look and say Benedict Mathurin, Nembhard, like if you have to pick a lane, it's not that clear. So Nembhard to me is a guy whose stock went way up as an NBA player.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. And Nembhard, listen, we talked about him defensively in that series. That was against that particular player. And I'd say the same thing against a guy like Luka Doncic if he ever had to guard him. Jalen Brunson and Luka Doncic are two of the most physical point guards in the league. And they're high-scoring, high-volume guys, and they rely on their strength a lot to get you to back up. And Nembhard, I thought for that reason, that was a bad matchup. But there's other guys in this league that are elite level guards, some of whom are still playing. I think he could do a really good job on like a guy like Shea, a guy like Kyrie Irving. He is a big time defensive player. But if you're asking him to guard certain types of guys that are using physical strength against you to that extent, that's a tough matchup for him. And that's why I was saying that. But he proved his offensive upside is far greater than I think anybody thought with the way that he just played in the Boston series. And I agree with you now. Going forward, it's interesting to see what is Indiana going to do. TJ McConnell was sensational. He was sensational.
Yep.
You have Benedict Mathurin, who is their star in the making at that position, who I think has got upside as an all-star caliber scorer in this league. He didn't even participate. So you got a lot of guys now to figure out, because as Nembhard, is he your starting 2, but then also your backup 1? Or is it still going to be Mathurin? Like, does TJ McConnell walk because there's going to be somebody that's going to give him more money? Like, so this is a lot of questions now that Nembhard, I think, has created for the Pacers by how well he played.
But good questions, because it provides you an out for some of those negative scenarios you're talking about. I was struggling with this one, Legs, because we could give it to the Nova Knicks as a whole, or you can try to give it to any one of them. We knew Jalen Brunson was good. He was even great in the playoffs. He gets it. Josh Hart, we knew he had that dog in him. I think that dog we learned was even bigger than we thought, playing 48 minutes a night and coming up as big. Dante DiVincenzo to me is the guy that I think most his stock is up, because we knew he was a good player, 3-and-D type guy. He had 2 30-point games in the playoffs, and he had 5 games where he hit 5 threes on 50% shooting or better. I think he, of those 3 guys, is the biggest winner. Even though they're all winners, I think he's the biggest winner, because that's more than 3-and-D. 30-point scoring is more than you expect from a 3-and-D guy. He stepped into a scoring role in a way I didn't expect he was capable of.
No doubt. Listen, Brunson didn't move the needle for me at all. I know that's who he is. That's right. That's a compliment to him, what I'm saying. I feel it kind of the same way about Josh Hart. Although, like, again, yeah, okay, maybe he showed you that, hey, look, in a playoff series, he's capable of doing this and having this kind of an impact. That's different than the regular season. Okay, I'll give you that. So maybe, yes, an uptick there. DiVincenzo's the obvious answer for me. Think about this. Coming into this season, his high scoring average for a season was 10 points a game. So right off the bat, he gets to 15 plus. He increased his career high for a season by 50% in one season. And then he like dumped kerosene on the whole thing in the postseason. And he's lighting it up the way he did. 3rd most made threes in the NBA. His upside offensively is so much greater than anybody knew at the start of the season. I can't even begin to describe how many rungs in the ladder he climbed from the beginning of the year in October to where we sit here now talking about Dante DiVincenzo. It's got to be him. Huge winner.
Yeah. The last ones, I mean, look, you could take your pick here, Legs. You could say Kyrie Irving. I think he's been great for a while, though. Like, this isn't just a playoffs thing. You could say Anthony Edwards, but he's had a little bit of ups and downs. More recently, a little bit more on the downside there. You could say Miles Turner, who I thought was good. If you had one more person to nominate, who would it be?
I actually think, and those are all good names, I actually think Obi Toppin helped himself.
It's a good one.
And I'll tell you why. Like, his numbers are very similar to what he did in the regular season. But again, that's a big deal for me. to know that Obi Toppin, a guy on a good team in the regular season, he actually played slightly less in the postseason and scored slightly more than he did in the regular season. So the fact that he had moments where he made shots as a 3-point shooter, his versatility, the way he can run the floor and get out in transition and finish. He had moments, like I felt like every night we watched, where Obi Toppin was really good. He had these splashy moments. So I think it's one thing to think that this is just some guy that, he's always going to be that 7th or 8th man on an NBA team, prove that he could be on a good regular season team. The fact that he replicated his production in the postseason stretch for 3 rounds, I think that's super impressive for me.
Yeah. You also could throw in Shea if you wanted to. I will say this, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Joe Mazzulla, those guys, TBD, because we knew they were all great.
Yeah.
All those players I just named are already great, and they could add their name to the list based on what happens over the next couple weeks here as we head to the NBA Finals. Go ahead and cue that outro music for us, Emma, as we get out of here. And I know we had one super chat. Let's get to that one. It comes from I think our most frequent super chatter, Legs. Psycho Blue, SFXT, he says, they called me a madman. Nico Harrison, probably. Hey, man, this is what I love about the GM game. A lot of the best moves are controversial when they happen.
Yeah.
And a lot of the worst moves are controversial when they happen. Sometimes you don't know what's going to be what until it plays out. But Nico Harrison has to be feeling pretty good about himself, I think. Any final thoughts, Legs?
No, man. I can't wait for this game tonight. And this is, if you're a basketball fan, what happened in game 4 needed to happen to extend this, to raise the level of drama, and now see what Minnesota's good response is going to be at home, and can they get this to a game 6? I think the pressure's mounting, and let's see who rises to that occasion tonight. I can't wait.
Tomorrow's show should be a great one. You're not going to want to miss it. As Legs is breaking down everything that happens in Game 5. Thanks for hanging with us, everybody. Hit that like button on the way out. We'll see you tomorrow.
We all silly like the mayor.